You're listening to the Good Question Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Our goal is to make each of our guests exclaim, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Because when that happens, it means you, the listener, may be inspired to learn more beyond the interview and to ask great questions yourself that lead to new insights. In this podcast, we cover historical and current anthropology, comparative religion, and history. Welcome, and let's get started.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Good Question Podcast. My guest today is Jonathan Wolk. He's a member of the American Institute of Architects. He's a licensed architect, contractor, and a real estate broker. And he's going to talk about how to find and transform property when inventory is scarce. So I think this might be a very interesting call. I was joking with him about repurposing like a nuclear silo into a house or a shipping container, but it may not be far off. So welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Well, tell me about, how you changed from, or you moved beyond just architecture into thinking in this way.
Well, yeah. So the title is very apropos and is exactly what we do because I'm in the Raleigh, North Carolina triangle market, and we have consistently had high demand with low supply, particularly in the residential market. But this model basically works for commercial properties, and as probably a lot of your listeners have seen, the transformation of like old hotels or motels into apartments. And, it's a lot about, finding something and then how do you convert it and be creative about converting it or expanding it or repositioning it, because there's so much demand and so little supply, or the market or the area shifts or changes. And so I started as an architect, wanted to be an architect since I was, a kid, used to draw house plans and do things like that, Lego, girders and panels, if anybody remembers those. And of course, Lincoln logs, those things. And then I always liked the building part of it. And so as in the process of becoming an architect, always was building stuff, and then sold my architectural practice at that time, and then went and worked for a large contractor, got the understanding and knowledge and sort of seeing behind the curtain, if you will, and got my contractor's license, became an unlimited license contractor. So we build residential, we can build high rise. And all throughout my career, I always partnered well with the subcontractors and the builders, and understanding, some of the specifics of what's needed. And that is one of the big issues, is a lot of architects don't know necessarily how to build or the process of building. And so that's really what I want to hone in on and be an architect-led design build firm. Then as more and more in that, realized that we really needed to be there even earlier. We need to be there when you're looking at the property, whether it's land or whether it's converting, like you said, an old missile silo into residential, or just wanting to do a house addition or renovation or a building, conversion or adaptive reuse. What can you do? What can you do with the property? Can you do what you want to do? And understanding that from a high level. And so what we really got into getting there and partnering with a lot of real estate agents and brokers, and being there when you're actually touring the property with the potential buyer to go through the pros and cons. And okay, you may want to do this, but can you? Or what's the hurdles to do it? What's the cost to do it? Is this the best fit for it? And so that's really where the concept of Wolk 360 came from, is being able to handle the process full circle. And so what really started driving that was even pre-COVID, but during COVID, the market went crazy. And so let's say you're looking for $1 million house and you're constantly getting outbid, or you can't compete, or you get there too late, and people were getting 10 and 12 offers on these houses, a sight unseen and things like that. So we developed a model where rather than competing at the $1 million house, why don't you find the location that you like? So in particular here, downtown Raleigh, you have a lot of different opportunities. And so a lot of people want to be downtown. And so it's like, okay, well, let's go find you a $400,000 or $500,000 house. Let's see if we can modify that, do through additions and renovation, and put another, $400,000 or $500,000 into the renovation addition of it. And you basically have, at the end of the day, a custom home that is the $1 million home that you wanted and in the location that you wanted. And so that's been our model, and that's really been a creative way. There's several others, but but it's been a creative way to be able to get what you want in the location you want and thinking through it a little bit different.
Yeah, it's funny. Like a friend of mine asked me what my ideal was. So I told him I like to live right downtown, like a 1 acre property with like 40-foot high walls with barbed wire, and a gate that you come in and out of. And when you leave the property, you're right downtown. So he's like, oh, it sounds like a dictator's palace. And I was like, yeah, I guess so. But just more practically, like I'm in Austin, Texas, and now they're talking about redoing the zoning to allow for ADUs, like accessory dwelling units.
Yeah.
And I know some people do tiny homes on their property. So is zoning the king of all this? Like where do you start with a property and analyze it?
Yeah, so Raleigh and Austin are very parallel in a lot of the development and technology and stuff like that. And so Raleigh just initiated that a few years ago. And at the time they were calling, they used to be called like granny flats and then ADUs and, the missing middle and, things of that nature. And so, yeah, it really is all about the zoning and what's allowed. And so a lot of the issues that tie into that are, how big can that ADU be? What's the definition of a tiny home? Different communities have different definitions. Sometimes it's a percentage of the main house square footage. Sometimes it's maxed out by zoning, some 500-600 square feet. Sometimes it's impervious area, setbacks. There's so many different things that come into play within the jurisdiction. And that's kind of what makes it difficult as well, because we get calls all the time. Hey, I want to put an ADU in my backyard and I see you did one and I like what you did there. Well, just because we did it in one community doesn't mean it's allowed in that community or we can do the same thing. The other complication with ADUs and tiny houses is they see these kits, and some of them are great. And they see this kit and they can buy this tiny home for $40,000. And they're like, great, I can afford to do a $40,000 tiny home. And it's like, yeah, but that's just the kit or that package. You've got to get it there. You've got to build a foundation. You've got to add sewer and water and electrical. You might have to add mechanical. What does that kit really include? Does it have all the finishes and fixtures and lighting? And so really understanding all of those costs and not buying into just what you see on the website, that's the devil's in the details, so to speak. And then can you put that on your property? Can you get it onto your property just because let's say you answer all those questions, can you get it there and get it back there and, delivered there? Do you need a crane or a truck, or how do you position it into place? And so there's so many issues that go into that. It's a great solution. It's a great option, but truly understanding the cost and what's required, that comes back to the whole premise of the Wolk 360 is that how do you understand what you're doing before you say bought that kit or even bought that house? You might be looking at that house and go, hey, this would be a great house. I can put an ADU back there for my mother-in-law, yada, yada, yada. And you buy it and then you find out, oh, I can't put it there because the HOA doesn't allow it or the zoning in that neighborhood doesn't allow it or whatever the case may be. So really getting there and understanding what you can and can't do is the critical first step. And what we try to do is help people before they've made that acquisition. They spend a little bit of money on some due diligence, but they're not necessarily making a $40,000 mistake buying that package and then all of a sudden realizing that they can't use it or can't install it. And that's where you're trying to be ahead of the curve on all that.
Yeah. So due diligence is like what, like a site survey, zoning, maybe even architectural plans, and submitting to the city to see if they're cool with it, or what?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of different steps. So you can do like a very high level approach, just kind of a quick high level analysis. Yeah, does the neighborhood allow it? Does zoning allow it? Do you have enough property to do it? Do you have enough capacity in your electrical panel to add another house worth of electrical, or is your panel maxed out and now you've got to expand your electrical panel? Will the power company allow you to do that, or do you have to separately meter that ADU? There's so many issues, and as you answer each question, you move to the next step. And so there's always hurdles and hiccups and things like that, but you want to try to understand, at least at a high level, what some of those issues are going to entail. And the further you can understand and know before you minimize your risk. Yes. And that's really what we try to help lead our clients through that decision-making process.
What are early misconceptions? How long it takes to build? Like, how much can that vary?
Oh, yeah. I was just meeting with a client this morning. I said, it's going to cost more than you think, and it's going to take longer than you think. The biggest misconception, especially when we're talking about this kind of stuff, is, well, my neighbor did it, or I drove past, down the street, they did it. And that, just because they did it, you don't know if they did it legitimately. You don't know what the zoning in so many cases changes, across the street or by neighbor. They could be in a different community and under different HOA guidelines. I would say the number one misconception in all projects is that, oh, well, they did it, so I should be allowed to do it. That's never just or we're grandfathered in. Well, in a lot of these communities, just like you were talking about in Austin, changing, zoning, in a lot of these communities, grandpa's dead. Grandfathering in doesn't necessarily work anymore. And the communities have gotten savvy to that. And with technology like Google Earth and all that sort of stuff, they can look and see, they can pull up aerial photos of your property from 15, 20 years ago and be like, oh no, that parking lot wasn't there when the house was built. You just put that in a few years ago. So that wasn't permitted. That's not allowed. So there's so many things that can now be fact checked on what was there and what it was used and what it was done initially to determine whether you can do what you can do. And so really the biggest misconception is just because somebody did it on their property does not necessarily mean you can do it on yours.
You must be a very patient person and are paid very well to deal with all this, because this is sounds just like a gigantic pain in the ass.
Well, we talk about that a lot with friends that are in the industry and stuff like that. But it's, first off, it's opportunity, right? Because again, sort of leading back to the title, these simple flat corner lot development sites, those are gone. I assume it's the same in Austin, but like in Raleigh, the cherry sites are long been cherry picked. So they're all going to have hair on them. They're all going to have issues and constraints and things. And so it's really, what's your appetite for doing it, and, will it work? And so it can be frustrating at times, but yeah, that's the job we do. That's the challenge we face. And that's what we're good at, and that's what we enjoy. And so it's really understanding the client's goals, what they want to do, what they want to accomplish, and how do we get there, and can we get there?
How often do you do really, this is probably very specialized, of course, this is what they showcase on TV, like, oh, this couple bought a church and then they turned it into their house, or they bought a firehouse and they turned it into their house. Is that incredibly rare? Is it more mundane?
Yeah,
I just want to add on there.
I think that kind of stuff's becoming more commonplace. Again, it comes back to the creativity of, in this location, this, works for me. Look at, we've designed many barn dominiums, and that's people looking at that, that as a, potential cost saving approach, or does that work for a vacation home? You mentioned container homes. We've done things like that. We've done prefabricated hotels where you're, basically building it up like blocks or a Lego set, So there's, it really comes down to what's your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? And can we do it that way? And, what's the cost to do it? And, what are the regulations and all that sort of stuff to make it happen?
Well, tell me an example of just a real run-of-the-mill milquetoast type thing, and then one that's really crazy that, you remember, or innovative.
So in New Mexico, we renovated this old beaten down historic hotel, and the cachet of it was that Billy the Kid had shot somebody in the saloon, and there were still Billy the Kid bullets in the wall. And this thing was falling down, dilapidated. They didn't have a straight wall in the place, straight floor in the place. And, the owner just loved it. He just fell in love with it and thought it was a great little downtown property. And we restored the saloon. We found the bullet holes in the wall and put a plaque and glass, cover over it so you could see it. We were, refinished and restored the wood bar, and we restored the wood, sanded down and restored the wood floors and converted all the rooms and brought them up to date. And so that was great. Another hotel we did in Greensboro, they really wanted to find an old warehouse that they could convert into a hotel and just could never find the right property. And so it was like, okay, well, instead of finding the property, let's just design the building out of, concrete and steel and make it look like a converted warehouse. So we built this brand new building with a restaurant and basically designed it around the proportions of like an old, warehouse building. And a lot of people, when they see it, don't realize that it's a brand new building or, it's 10, 15 years old now. But, it's things like that. It's, it's finding those opportunities. Again, it really just comes down to the cherry sites are gone. How do you find a location, a site, or a building that works for you? We went to a conference and it was all investors, all number crunchers, investors. And I got invited to this conference and I was saying to the host of the conference, I'm like, well, why did you invite? I do small investing, right? I do, some of our own projects and stuff like that. But these are like big time investors, multi-million-dollar investors. And he said, because what you bring to the table is what they don't have. They don't have the vision and the creativity to come into this old warehouse and say this would be a perfect location to convert to apartments. And it's going to cost, $20 million to do it, but you're going to wind up with 300 apartments and the pro forma works and da-da-da-da-da. That's the part they love, right? Okay, it's a $20 million investment, but it's going to make you $60 million and then you can sell it for $100 million. But they can't look at that old warehouse building and say, oh, this is a perfect opportunity to make 300 apartments. And he said, that's what you bring to the table. And so that's the kind of stuff that we love to get involved in because it's that creative thinking and gets you, those people excited because then they see, oh, this is a great opportunity for ROI. So it's a lot of, it's always that kind of stuff. Sometimes it's somebody bringing the idea to the table. It's like, hey, I see this opportunity for this building. What would it be good for? And then, you sort of help them brainstorm it and put the team together and they pull the investment together. And next thing you know, you've got an adaptive reuse project or something that's converted or maybe it becomes a mixed use project. So that's really what we do. That's the exciting thing. And we don't sort of specialize in one, we don't just do hotels and we don't just do residential. We don't just do warehouses. We do a little bit of everything because we love that creative. My wife says it's because I'm, ADD and can't focus, but I love that part of it, that it's never the same thing twice. Even in our residential projects, they look very different. If you look at our website, wolk360.com, you'll see that a lot of our projects don't look the same because it's not about our design. It's about our bringing your vision to life. And so if you want something hyper contemporary, we can do that. If you want something classic, we can do that. And it's really about bringing out your personality and what you want and what you want, that how is that going to enhance your life and your life right now?
So I remember many years ago growing up in New York, people would put in a dormer. They'd have like maybe a 2-floor house. The top was like a pitched roof, like a triangle, and they would make it a block. They'd dormer the top and get a lot more room that way. So I thought about that. That's like the oldest conversions I've seen. And it seems like areas where one person does something, like everyone tries to do the same thing.
Right. I'll tell you, through COVID, we did so many attic or basement conversions for offices or classrooms or playrooms for the kids or finding that extra space and that extra square footage to because now everybody was stuck in their home and a lot of those people now keep using those offices and things like that because they realized, oh, this works great. And now they've added value to their house, right? So we convert that attic space into, call it a home office or another bedroom or whatever the case may be. And now they've added that square footage to the value of their home. They may have spent some money, but they're going to get 2 to 3 times X return on it because they've added that heated square footage to their home that previously was basically unused space. So yeah, doing that dormer stuff and things like that, we did a ton of that. Like I said, through COVID. And again, a lot of it's like when you're trying to find a property that works for you, maybe it's a 1,500 square foot house, but you really need 2,000 square feet or you need that extra bedroom. Do you go up? Do you go down? Do you go out the back? What worked best in that case to get you that little bit of that extra square footage?
You gotcha. How do you know enough about local laws that you can work in other states? Like, I would think you'd have by far the most expertise in your area and literally know all the people on planning and zoning and all that stuff. When you go to other states, like, are you at a disadvantage, or you can figure it out?
I think knowing the questions to ask, this is crazy. We were looking at a project in New Mexico, in this small town in New Mexico where, they wanted to do a mixed use project downtown in this little downtown community. And so I said to the client, I said, well, the first thing we got to do after we walk the properties, we got to go in and talk to the zoning officer, just like you say, what are the issues here? What's at stake? This is what we want to do. Does this fall into the town's, 20-year plan? Is this something that they're for or against? We got to understand their positioning. We go in and he was very skeptical, and we go in and we sit down with the zoning administrator. And I said, look, I'm from North Carolina, and I don't really know much about the area, but this is why we're here, to sit down and talk. And he's like, I'm from North Carolina. He's like, I used to run the zoning office in such and such a town. And so we hit it off, and he said, oh yeah. He said, no, it's very different than North Carolina. These are the issues, da da da. We had an hour sit down. He laid out the process, the program, the zoning, the issues that we're going to have. This is what you're up against, but this is the pro side of it, da da da. And we walked out of the office, and it was a great meeting. And the client looks at me and he's like, how the hell do you walk into this small town in New Mexico and you instantly hit it off with the zoning guy, the most important guy in our whole process? And, sometimes it's just dumb luck. Sometimes it's, just knowing what to ask for and getting in there and making that connection. But yeah, it's a big difference when you know those people, and sometimes that can be good, sometimes that can be bad, and knowing those people or just knowing, the questions to ask. And the questions to ask are relatively the same as you go around the country, but there's always nuance to it, or this one has a different process. But you got to understand the process so you understand your timeframes and limitations and expectations.
Are there places that are just hostile to any development?
Well, famously, it's now I forget the name of the town, but where Clint Eastwood was mayor, and they've got Carmel. Yeah, that's why he became mayor. Doing, what was that, 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, maybe. But there's anytime you're doing something at the coast or the beach or on the water or a big lake, you always have issues there. We did a golf course project years ago, and with clubhouse and a development, and they found a bald eagle, and we had to set up I think it was like some crazy 50-mile perimeter around the bald eagle's nest that was found before you could do anything, and had to track it. Environmental issues, there's great opportunities in redeveloping environmental sites that had old oil tanks on them. Laundromats are notorious, gas stations are notorious, but there's also opportunities there. Once you get that site clean, you've added a ton of value now because you've cleaned it up, and there's all kinds of grants and TIFs and funds available for that. But yeah, those are big issues to understand what you're getting into. And then you're also getting into multi-layered approvals. So it's there's some approvals that are city, some that are county, some that are state, some that are national, some that are regional. So you depending on the level of development that you're doing and the extent of the project, there could be multi-layered, approvals. You might have to get the Corps of Engineers involved because there's waterways on the property, or are they blue line streams, or are they just wetlands? What are they? And so depending on those determinations so who do you got to get approval from to get it done?
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, but then that's why that land's been sitting there for that long, or that's why that land is cheap, or that's why that house is cheap because, or cheap compared to the area, because it's not going to be easy to come in and do what you want to do. But those are the sites, again, like areas like you're in and I'm in, those are the sites that are available. Those are the sites that are the opportunity to just think you're going to go and pick up the corner of Main and Main for $500,000 and be able to do what you want to do, those days are long gone.
Well, I saw a show about the Venetian Hotel in Vegas, and because of the gondolas and the waterways, they actually had to get like the Coast Guard or something ridiculous in there, and they have the right seat belts in the gondolas. All this, it was just so crazy. But stuff like that happened.
Yeah, exactly. And it all goes to, we've done a lot of daycares, we've done a lot of restaurants. Who do you have to go get approvals from, to operate, something like that? And you just start going into so many different levels of what do you, who do you need to get involved to approve this?
Should people be afraid? I mean, like, again, how difficult is it? I know it depends on a lot of factors, but is it often easier than you think, harder than you think?
Here's what I say to a lot of our clients. You're hiring us as the professionals. It's our job to know this stuff. Yes, it's complicated. It's complicated to know the, hundreds of pages of building code and what codes apply. It's a lot to know what you've got to do for your health department approvals, or where do you need state approval from, or do you need to get Corps of Engineers involved? What I tell my clients is that is what you're hiring us and our team for, right? You tell us what you want to do. We'll help you through that process and guide you and present you with options or the challenges. But you do what you do best. So maybe you're a doctor or a lawyer or you're a manufacturer of whirligigs or something, right? You focus on that. And you keep focused on doing your business because that's what's making you money and that's what's paying for this project. If you start to try to do what we do and take your eye off of what you do, you're going to lose money on both accounts. And so stay focused on what you do best, rely on your team, have faith in your team, and we'll show you that we can deliver what you want. And you need to make some decisions, especially when costs are involved, but you'll need to make some decisions and we'll present you with those options so that you can be part of the decision-making process. And we'll give you guidance on those. And there's always, pros and cons. There's always costs involved. And so giving you the best playbook to understand that. But if you start taking your eye off your business, you're going to lose money there. And if you start trying to do our business, you're going to lose money there as well.
Yeah, it makes sense. In another movie, The Poltergeist came to mind. They built the house on like an Indian burial ground. And I know it's ridiculous examples, but that's what comes to mind as I speak to you,
Well, see, I would say that's more a case of people trying to make shortcuts and cut corners and try to get away with something. And, that didn't work out so well for them. They tried to save a buck on not relocating the bodies. Speaking of funny stories, that brings to mind, I had a client that years ago that he was telling me about a previous builder that he was working with or was looking to work with. And this builder had gone through a whole redesign, rebranding exercise. And one of the things they thought they would do that was clever was rather than having a rectangular card, they cut the corner off the card so it had like a little different shape to it. And the guy, the builder's so proud of this new branding, and he hands my client the card. And the first thing my client says to him is, "Oh, so I see you're a builder that likes to cut corners."
Oh no.
Killed it right there. I mean, he said the guy almost was like in tears, and he's like, he goes, "Sorry, I can't work with you." And so,
wow. Yeah, I didn't think about that. That's terrible.
That's like your poltergeist. It's an extreme case, but it does show that stuff matters, and you can't cut corners even if you're trying to be clever about it. Here's another great one. My grandfather built ships in World War II, and after World War II he built his own house, and brick by brick he did everything. He was he was like one of those greatest generation guys, right? And I was so proud to show him my office that I built. And in my office, I had this angled wall that the corridor was kind of at a 5-degree angle. And he walks in and he's looking up and down this wall, and he's fixated on this corner. And he's looking up and down, and he's stepping side to side, and he's looking around, and I'm like, no, what's wrong? What's going on? He's like, geez, I don't know how to tell you this. And I'm like, what? Like, what's going on? I don't get it. And he goes, your wall is crooked. And I'm like, it's crooked? What do you mean it's crooked? And I'm looking at it. I'm like, you mean it's not plumb? He goes, no, it's standing straight up. It's crooked. Look, you can't see it's crooked. And I'm like, you mean it's at an angle? And he goes, yeah. He goes, it's crooked. And I'm like, no, Milt, we did that on purpose. It's at an angle. And he looks at me and he goes, well, why the hell would you do that? I'm like, that's part of the design. So it's like, it's those crazy things that happen through the design process, and some people perceive it in a different way. And I think that's the exciting thing. I mean, it's like you can get into the whole discussion about what is art and is that art? I could do that. Well, if you could do it, then do it. You didn't do it.
Yeah.
And so
I've been in houses where like the foundation's off, the floor is warped. And I can tell you, I've been in houses so bad, I wouldn't live there if you paid me, because it makes me sick to be in the house. Instant horrible.
Yeah. Well, that's just bad. That's either an old house that hasn't been taken care of or bad craftsmanship, And so I'm pointing out that's the difference, right? There's when you do things with intent and intention, that's good. That's design. When you cut corners or are sloppy or don't have craftsmanship, that's bad. That there's a big difference.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Well, very good. What's the best way for people to find you?
So our website is Wolk360.com. That's WOLK 360.com. We're on all the socials. Instagram, we're Wolk360DB. Facebook, Wolk360. YouTube, Wolk360. Yeah, seek us out and take a look. I think you'll see some really cool stuff and get a sense of what we're doing.
Okay, well, very good. Well, Jonathan, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's been very interesting, and that's really cool what you do.
Thanks for having us.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
Thank you for listening to the Good Question Podcast. Please email support@thegoodquestionpodcast.com if you have any referrals to great guests for us to interview. Visit thegoodquestionpodcast.com to hear more interviews. And please help us spread the word by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this podcast.